Hi, guys. I am a little bit later getting this out than I wanted to be, but a lot of things have been going on, and I wanted to make sure that I could actually sit down and focus on this for a couple of minutes. Chapters 1 and 2 of Invisible Man. Pretty intense stuff that's going on there, and a few of you have reached out to me saying you had some questions, you wanted some clarity on some things, and so I wanted to just talk about a couple of the points that are really critical in these chapters. We'll start with chapter 1. I'm not going to go over every single one of the questions that I asked you, but I did want to touch on a couple of really important elements. To start with, we have this obviously intense scene, the battle royal, where the narrator has shown up expecting to deliver a speech and expecting to be awarded with a scholarship. That, of course, does happen, but not until after he is thrown into combat with a bunch of other young black men who are all there to fight for seemingly, fistfuls of cash, which it turns out later is all just an elaborate ruse set up for the entertainment of these wealthy white men. There are a lot of things that happen in this section that are really important. One of the motifs that's really important in this section is that of blindness, literal blindness, as the men are blindfolded. There's smoke going around the arena, which also makes it difficult to see. And this blindness representing, in this scene, the lack of transparency that the white man had towards the narrator. He did not know that he would be fighting. Also, the literal blindness of them fighting wildly without knowing who they were fighting because they literally could not see them. This scene obviously represents the barbaric attitude taken by the white men towards the young black men, the hierarchy that's in place where they can use these black men for basically playthings for their own sport and entertainment. There are a lot of historical examples of this if you were to study it, but I'm not going to get into that here. But this is a direct allusion to some of the events that happened in this time period. The black men were there freely, they chose to participate, other than the narrator, but they felt compelled to because it was a quick way to earn some money. But it fed the stereotype of them being barbaric and animalistic in nature. Of course, the white men in this are certainly not painted in a very favorable light. Not only are they there to fight, but they are drinking heavily, smoking. There's the scene where there is the ring girl walking around naked, and the men treating her like an object as well. But you see the narrator even getting drawn in by this and fighting against this attraction he has towards this woman as he's trying to remain this very sophisticated, calm intellectual, but his basal instincts and desires are also trying to push their way to the surface. And so you see this inner turmoil that exists in the narrator right from the get-go as he's trying to be exactly what the white men want him to be, which is a intellectual, but an intellectual underneath their guidelines. So he has to be subservient to them, and they want him to basically teach the other black men how to follow his lead, which is to play the game, and then everybody wins. He gets an education, the white men maintain their power, and it's a win-win situation, at least from the white man's perspective in this. And so this battle royal goes on, and we obviously see that when it's over, they weren't actually fighting for money, that they were fighting for these fake tokens. And afterwards, they do allow the narrator to give his speech. And the speech is really interesting. There's a couple points that I wanted to look at. First, on page 29, he has this, this allegory essentially, where he talks about at the bottom 20. And a ship lost at sea for many days suddenly sighted a friendly vessel. From the mast of the unfortunate vessel was seen a signal. Water, water, we die of thirst. The answer from the friendly vessel came back. Cast down your bucket where you are. He goes on to use this as an example that the black men need to cast down the bucket where they are, which is, one, to learn to help yourself, and to use the resources that are around you presently. This is good advice. Unfortunately, it is advice that serves, once again, the agenda of the white man, where the resources that they want the black men to use are the white men, but when they use them as resources, they become beholding to them, and that's really important here. They are giving the narrator a scholarship so that he can go train himself to become a better part of this community, not so he can go become an independent thinking revolutionist. And so that's really critical. The narrator, obviously, during this speech, you see, makes a rather critical error. You guys saw that. And so I don't need to go into that too much, but he almost loses his scholarship because he misspeaks. Anyway, we don't need to go into that too much. We also meet we're introduced to a memory he has of his grandfather, where his grandfather tells him that he needs to basically play the game in order to destroy the system, and the narrator hasn't quite figured that out yet. He's playing the game, but it's not because he's trying to destroy the system, it's because he's trying to benefit from the system, and that's really important as well. So remember, at the end of the prologue, we see a very broken man who is taking joy in stealing and fighting back silently, but in chapter 1 we meet the same man who is trying his hardest to fit in and be part of what is happening. But within that, you see the conflict inside of him, his nature battling with his nurture, and obviously that's something that's going to come out more and more. Okay, and then we move into chapter 2. Now, chapter 2 is rather disturbing. It's very important. One thing you'll notice that the narrator is going to do in this is be very almost in your face with some of the names. We meet a man whose last name is Trueblood. He was a black man who most of the people in the community believe is guilty of raping his own daughter. He has an elaborate story. I hope you are able to follow that story. It is a little bit uncomfortable, but that's by design, because we need to have these horrible feelings towards Trueblood in order to understand how the typical people in the town view him. His story is that he had a dream, and because his daughter was sleeping next to him, which was not that uncommon because a lot of times people couldn't afford heat. They slept together in the same beds. But he impregnated his own daughter. He says it was an accident as part of a dream, and he woke up and realized what had happened. Obviously, most people think that is a lie and that he, in fact, raped her. But his family is still together. It wouldn't have been easy for his wife to leave him at this time. She, attacks him, but she doesn't leave him, and there he is, going to be a father again with his own daughter, unfortunately. And Trueblood, the reason he is accepted by the white men is really important, because they wanted an example of the savagery or the animalistic nature of black men and black people in this time period. Other black men and women despised him. They didn't treat him poorly because he was a disgrace, because of what he did. They viewed him as a criminal. They viewed him as a monster. But people in white society, they liked having him as an example of, and a reason to justify their poor treatment and attitude towards other black men and women in this community. And that's really important. We also meet a man named Norton. Now, if you're unfamiliar with White Man's Burden, Norton is an example of that. It's essentially this idea of white guilt, where he feels guilty and he feels compelled to try to help black men and women in this time period because his ancestors have been so horrible in the treatment of these individuals. And so here he is, a wealthy donor to the college. This college, of course, is fictional, but it is based on the Tuskegee Institute. There are a few references in here to Booker T. Washington, really important. We'll talk about him later, but you'll need to familiarize yourself with Booker T. Washington and Emerson. And I will be sending some information out about Emerson so you can better understand why that reference is so important. These are things that we would be talking about in class, but these allusions to these individuals are really critical into understanding what the message of Ellison is in this novel, especially early on. It creates this expectation, and so stay tuned. We'll be talking about that as we go. Now, when you get to the end of chapter 2, Norton is beyond overwhelmed. He can't believe what has happened. He is basically having a fainting spell. He's very upset, of course, about all these things. You learn a little bit about Norton, that he lost his daughter, and there's a strange, almost pedophile tone in the way he talks about his daughter. Again, this contrast. You have True Blood, seen as a monster, and Norton, who seems as if he's trying to make up some wrongdoing. It never says exactly what it is, but he's being very generous. He has a close relationship with the narrator, and you get a sense that not all is right with Norton, even though nothing is specifically mentioned. And so just something to keep in mind. So I'm not going to go into a ton of detail with the dream and with all that, but on page 68 is when True Blood says basically that the black men and women at the school dislike him, but the white folks treat him fine. And that's really important. At the end of the chapter, again, you have Mr. Norton, who is so overwhelmed he needs a drink, and they're going to go now into a black community and go to a bar in a black community because it's the closest one. But the narrator is making a very critical mistake here, and we're going to read about that in chapter 3 and see what the consequences of that are starting in chapter 4. And so one thing I want to do, guys, is take your questions. I'm going to try to set up an online chat through Zoom. I mentioned that in an email, or maybe a chat room discussion. This novel needs discussion. It's tough to read it on your own and just get everything out of it. We need to bounce ideas off of each other, and so I'm going to try to find the best way to do that. We need to move through it fairly quickly because we still have an essay that we need to write. I'm hoping we're back to school in May, but I don't know yet. I will be sending another one of these out this week. You have chapters 3 and 4 due early next week. That's on Canvas now, and so make sure you get on there and look over those. But I'll send another one of these out probably on Wednesday or Thursday just to kind of check in. But if you have questions, guys, please email me. I'm happy to give you my thoughts on things, and that'll also give me an idea of what you guys are or not understanding, and so I can maybe address some of those specifically through video. But hopefully you guys are being safe. You are, not being like the teenagers everywhere else and getting into large groups and making everybody sick. I don't know. You teenagers need to, start following these laws, or they're going to call in the National Guard, and I'm going to see several of you arrested and thrown in the back of squad cars, and I'm not bailing you out. So hopefully we're taking this stuff seriously. I put together a trampoline this morning. Yep, I'm the hero right now in my family. And tomorrow I'm going to plant potatoes. That's a new thing I'm going to be trying. I got free time on my hands, so might as well learn a few new skills. Anyway, hope you guys are well, and I will talk to you all soon.